Late last year, the federal government announced it would be making cuts to Canada's immigration targets. So after a few years of raising that target, eventually aiming for 500,000 new permanent residents in 2025, they essentially decided,
we're going to do an about face. That 500,000 for this year becomes 395,000. And we're decreasing it by about 15,000 each year for the next 2 years, 3 years or so.
That's one of our guests today, Anthony Bambokian. He's a senior economic analyst with Scotiabank. But even with a reduction in newcomers, Canada will continue to be a country of immigrants.
Absolutely. Irrespective of where numbers are, immigration is extremely critical to our population growth and our economic growth. We can't do it alone.
And statistics aside, each of those people or families coming to Canada have their own set of challenges to face.
Yeah, I think coming to Canada is both exciting and can be scary at the same time.
That's Kingsley Chak, the Senior Vice President of Deposits and Investments at Scotiabank.
The most important part is making sure new Canadians feel welcome and help them to integrate in the society. And banking is often the first step.
So this episode, Kingsley and Anthony will not only help us get our heads around Canada's changing immigration targets and the potential economic impacts that may have, but also the hurdles new Canadians face when they do arrive in Canada, both from a data standpoint and day-to-day practical standpoint, including how they do their banking. Because after all,
at the end of the day, whether we're looking at today or we're looking at historically, Canada's population almost exclusively relies on immigration to grow. We're going to need people from all over the world to come to Canada, bring their skills, bring their education, and really help us grow.
I'm Stephen Maurice, and this is Perspectives. Kingsley, welcome back.
Good to be back, Stephen.
And Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
Really happy to be here. Thank you very much.
All right, Kingsley, I will get to you in just a minute. I just want to start with Anthony. Maybe you can get us up to speed a little bit on the immigration story over the last couple of years, because there's been some changes. We went from record high numbers during the pandemic to a little bit of an about face over the last year or so. Can you just walk us through what that looked like over the last couple of years?
Definitely. So I think the story really goes back predating COVID when we're looking at where permanent admission targets were and where they were going. If you start looking at around 2016, 2017, that's when the government did the decision to start increasing those admission targets. So prior to those years, we were at 225 to 275,000 admissions every year. And we made the decision to increase those up to about 340,000 year over year. And this was really a mix of different reasons. Mostly it was for economic purposes, add to our labor force, grow our labor force there. A lot of it was also reuniting families, so people who are primary applicants coming in, bringing their families along with them. And we also did greatly expand the share of humanitarian and refugees coming to Canada. So if you remember from the mid-2010s, a lot of geopolitical upheaval, and Canada really stepped up there and increased the share of permanent residents coming in. So you did see that increase year over year leading up prior to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when COVID came about, economies, countries shut down, travel became severely restricted. And whatever our target was back then really dropped off. And we still admitted about 185,000. So fast forward, we're starting to come out of the pandemic. We have these gaps in our labor force. We still have a backlog of people who had applied for permanent residence that we need to get back up to speed to and really start streamlining again. So we get to a point where we've decided to increase those targets yet again. Mm-hmm. In 2021, we decide, okay, we're going to start admitting around the low 400s, 400 to about 420,000 for the next 3 years. The following year in 2022, we decide to up that again. So we decide, okay, we're going to start from the low 400,000s, but we're going to go to about the mid 400,000s now. Again, part of it's economic, you have the family reunification, and still the humanitarian. And then finally, going into 2023, we up that yet again. So we're at the mid 400,000s now to cap off at about 500,000 going into this year, 2025. And it's really only at the end of 2024 when we do that 180 when it comes to permanent residents. So rather than add another 500,000 permanent residents this year, we do that 180, we decide, okay, population is really increasing at levels we weren't anticipating before. We're going to do an about face. That 500,000 for this year becomes 395,000. And we're decreasing it by about 15,000 each year for the next 2 years, 3 years or so. And that's where we currently are.
Okay. And those are the permanent resident newcomers that you're talking about, the actual number of newcomers to Canada is significantly higher when you include the other sectors.
Significantly higher, yeah. We're actually very good when it comes to hitting our permanent residence target. There's a very stringent process, a lot of different fields. We can overshoot, we can undershoot year over year, but generally speaking, we hit the targets we're looking for. Where we really took our eye off things was in that temporary resident, that non-permanent resident part of immigration. So I'm talking about people in their temporary work visas, international students, and to an extent, refugees. Again, they are labor-based, they could be educational-based when it comes to universities, but we saw those numbers really take off coming out of the pandemic. To give you a bit of context, halfway through 2021, our temporary resident population was about 1.3 million. Fast forward 3 years, we've just surpassed the 3 million mark. So that is a very rapid expansion over a short period of time.
Okay. I think we'll probably mostly focus on the permanent resident question. Then can you just provide a bit of the rationale for why, and I guess it's mostly demographics that we're talking about, demographic and employment situation in Canada, but why there was that big increase up to like around 500 plus thousand, and then also why we were scaling that back in the last year or so.
Yeah, so part of these issues, again, predate COVID when it comes especially to the labor force side of things. So at the end of the day, whether we're looking at today or we're looking at historically, Canada's population almost exclusively relies on immigration to grow. If you want to look at our labor force, for example, too, if we look at people who are, say, 55 years old and above, as a share of our labor force, that's about 20% of the labor force, which is pretty big. Yeah. If you want to compare that to 25 years ago, so 2000, those who were 55 years old, as a share of that force was half of that, around 10%. That's a lot of people either thinking about retirement, planning retirement, or about to retire. So we need to make up for those numbers, and we're just not having enough babies to grow our population naturally in that sense. And that's where immigration comes in.
Okay, so there have been fluctuations. They were necessary to adapt to the other circumstances that existed within the country and so on. So there'll be fluctuations in the number of people that we bring in. At the end of the day, Canada has always been a country of immigrants. That's not going to change, right? Given the demographics that you were just talking about, we will continue to need to bring people in.
Absolutely. So if we don't have adequate and effective immigration in that sense, we're going to start seeing it in the labor force, whether it's going to be gaps or whether it's going to be a shrinking labor force. And this is going to cause a lot of problems down the road, some of which we're actually already talking about now. So let's talk about housing, for example. When those immigration numbers really start to increase, a lot of talk was about we don't have adequate housing to accommodate everybody, to absorb everybody, especially in our major cities, for example. On the flip side, if we really do want to increase the number of housing starts, if we want to increase that supply, we're going to need those skilled immigrants coming in to really plug those gaps and fill those positions so we have the labor force able to do it. So as somebody who comes from a family who is in manufacturing and is in construction, I can tell you that when you want to build a house, for example, it's countless amounts of people in countless different professions coming together to build that house and to build that on a large scale. As a population just as ourselves, we don't necessarily have those numbers, and that's where immigration comes in. If we go too much to one side, we're really restricting that, and we have an aging population. You get to a point where either you have a lot of job vacancies in certain critical positions, for example, or you can get a shrinking labor force. And that can really slow down a lot of those projects that have really come to the forefront in Canadian society and politics for the last couple of years.
So it's a question of finding the balance between bringing in enough new people to keep your population growing and to keep your workforce stable, but also making sure that you're set up structurally from an infrastructure point of view, services, all of those things, that you can actually meet that new demand.
Exactly. So it's both a quantity and a quality thing. It's not just trying to hit that sweet spot when it comes to new arrivals into Canada, but it's also effectively putting them in positions that match their skills and qualifications. So new arrivals to Canada do have issues where they're frequently underemployed or they're in positions where they're overqualified for those positions. And you're really missing out on unlocking their true potential, for example, which could really benefit Canada both in the short and long run. This even extends to education, for example, where newcomers who've come under a study permit who are now graduating more at the bachelor level. When you get to master's and PhD, it kind of evens out, but a lot of them are ending up in the sales and service sector. Now, how many of those are clearly identifying they want to go into that versus Those who have just kind of, say, been pigeonholed into that or couldn't find something that matches their skills is up for debate. But when you look at a couple of studies showing, let's say, new graduates from 2020, a couple of years on, when you have large numbers, let's say around 30% of new university graduates going into that sales and service part, and then around the same kind of numbers saying that they feel way overqualified for their positions, and it's not really what they expected, and they don't have that job satisfaction, we're seeing these mismatches really come to the forefront.
Okay. Kingsley, I decided to get back to you. I will now. Given what Anthony was just saying, it's clear that there is going to continue to be a significant number of newcomers coming to Canada. In your experience, personal or professional, what are the main challenges that newcomers face when they're trying to settle in here?
I think coming to Canada is both exciting and can be scary at the same time. And speaking from personal, with my parents who immigrated to Canada when I was 14 years old. So I kind of see this firsthand. I think there are a couple of challenges, right? Number one is employment. Getting a job, having that consistent income is helpful. And a lot of times when newcomers come in, their credential and their past experience are not recognized in Canada. That creates a barrier. Related to this is your financial health. You're coming into a new banking system. You don't know how it works. That's a challenge. How do you get credit? And that often provides some barriers. Then the next one is obvious, is language. A lot of immigrants coming in, English is not their first language. And tying that into the new cultural environment and settling in a new dynamic, language, culture all together, that could be intimidating and challenging.
For sure. Just throw it back to you for 1 second, Anthony. Is there any data that tells us anything about how long it takes newcomers to find their feet once they get here in terms of, I don't know, reaching the same level of income, say, as a person who was born here or has been here a longer time?
Yeah, so it really does depend on the stream they're coming in on. So have they been admitted? What particular stream are they coming through? What's the purpose of them coming to Canada? And this can differentiate wildly. So to give you an example, if you're coming in, let's say under, the economic class, Canadian experience class immigrant, for example, first year coming in as a PR, you could be earning around $50,000 to $55,000. Compare that maybe to the spouse of that person coming in who might not necessarily have those same skills. They might be earning significantly less. You might be looking at $30,000 to $35,000. Go even further. Let's say somebody who's come in as a refugee, for example. Perhaps they do have those skills back in their home country, but coming in as a refugee provides its own barriers and limitations itself. And sometimes there you could see incomes of $20,000, $25,000 starting. Yeah. And if you really want to expand this over a period of time, it's once again those who are under those economic classes, who are more skilled, who have come in admitted under those programs that do see the most wage growth. So somebody who's earning $55,000, let's say they arrived in 2012. In 2022, which is around when we have most recent data, they're earning around $80,000 to $85,000. So there is quite a lot of growth, which you don't see again at those other classes. So at the end of the day, it does come down to those kind of streams. If they're coming in as more educated, more highly skilled, they could already be at a higher level compared to their Canadian born. If they're not under those streams or they face significant barriers because of the kind of application they're coming in on, even though their wages could grow, they might not actually converge to those who are born in Canada.
Okay. And in addition to the challenges that Kingsley was talking about, are there any others that you see that are some of the main impediments to newcomers being able to find their feet?
Language is a huge barrier. It's not just how large is the language barrier, but how critical is the language barrier to the field of work you're in. Right. So that can make a huge difference. Sometimes you do have that skills gap, for example. So you might have the skills coming from your country. They may not necessarily translate over to Canada or whatever province you could be in. And that could take time. You need to go to skill bridging programs for that. You might have to take additional courses and whatnot. And again, that could take months upon months to get up to speed there. Where in that space, if you're not reaching those kind of skills or you don't have those kind of qualifications, for example, are you entering a job which aligns with what you've studied or what you've learned in the past? Are you going to be able to get to that position? How long is it going to take? So you do have a lot of issues where people are either coming in, they're overqualified and there's underemployment for the job. So trade skills, educational skills and whatnot, transferring them over could be a huge, huge issue.
Okay. And I should just mention that Scotiabank also aims to support newcomers through our ScotiaRise Social Impact Initiative, which funds programs helping newcomers with education, language skills, financial literacy, employment prospects. Mm-hmm. But Kingsley, you talked about some of those challenges that people face when they get here. And specifically, You're a banker. You talked about some of the financial challenges, even of just being able to navigate the financial world when you get here. What are those specific challenges? And ultimately, what do you try to do about them?
Yeah, so I think the first thing coming in is to get a banking account, right? Like that can provide a variety of challenges. First one is you need to get your local IDs first, right? If you don't have government issued ID, opening a banking account is challenging.
Right.
Number two is credit history. Like I think you talk to a lot of immigrants, they have strong credit history in the home country that they come from. When they come to Canada, they need to restart anew.
Start from scratch.
Right? Like that's another challenge. And those things are really critical to settling in. Let's say if you have young kids coming in, you need to pay for childcare, you need to find a job, like having a banking account and getting a credit card, getting some credit to
Even
get things going.
renting an apartment.
Absolutely.
Like
Even
that.
renting an apartment, that's a gap, right? Like, so just getting a bank account is not as easy for new immigrants, and we definitely try our best to make it easier for newcomers, new clients coming in to open an account with Scotiabank.
So how do you do that?
Yeah, so we have a program called Start Right, and that's specifically designed for newcomers, Canadians, that come in and make that process easier. If someone is coming into a new banking system and the banking system in their home country works very differently, going to a branch, booking an appointment, talking to our financial advisors, that's a good first step, because not only you're going to get all your needs met and accounts open up, you also get a overview on, hey, here's how things work, here's what you need to do, and advisors across the country are very well equipped to do that and excited to welcome newcomers coming in. On top of talking directly to advisors at our branch, we recently launched a new process where newcomers can open a bank account and apply for a credit card fully digitally. So they can go to our website, go to our banking app, and do that at the comfort of their home. And now we have an option to do that too. That's number one. Number two, we talk a little bit about credit history. We're the first bank to partner with Nova Credit.
So that's Nova Credit, you said?
Exactly. And so what they do is you submit information to Nova Credit, and they'll go to your home country and get your credit report and bring it to Scotiabank. Right? So every newcomer is coming to the bank, we give them $1,000 credit limit to start with. And based on, as Anthony said, which immigration status you're coming in, and based on your job status, that 1,000 can vary, but minimum is 1,000. And if you're using Nova Credit, we'll see up to 2x the credit that you're given, which is a big support for the family. So those two are major ways that we're helping the client. And obviously, when newcomers come in, there will be welcoming offers, which cash incentive, that's always help. And then their first year banking fee is waived. So that's also helping our client getting a foothold in Canada and getting used to the banking system and getting them started faster.
And are these things that the bank has to think about more now, just given the number of people that are coming in? You would have lots of newcomers coming and are trying to do those very basic things. Has that changed the way the bank has thought about the way it trains people or the programs that it offers?
Yeah, I think the great thing is in our branch network and in our contact center, we hire a lot of new immigrants coming in.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the number one thing is making sure that our advisor and workforce reflect the community that they serve, and oftentimes they are. So when newcomers coming in, they are speaking their own language and someone who has gone through this, and that's a big help in terms of thinking about the emotional support and the cultural support. Our branch staff are very, very good at doing that. And we're also looking at, from a terms and condition perspective, how many of those could be in the language that the client is familiar with. So those are things that we're doing. Also, what we're looking at is how do we welcome the newcomers and get them set up before they arrive in Canada. So we call that the pre-arrival process. So if you know that you're going to be coming to Canada in the next month or so, a lot of anxiety, you got to wait until you come to Canada and come to the city that you're landing in and go figure out all the stuff. We're looking at ways to allow newcomers to do that and get that done and over with. So you know coming in, I have a bank account, I have all that set up, and just a peace of mind. So that's the direction that we're going to, is focusing on the pre-arrival onboarding and how we make that process simpler.
Okay. I get the feeling that entrepreneurship is very important to many newcomers, whether it's by necessity because it's hard to find a job, so maybe starting a business is an alternative. Anthony, is there any truth to that? Do we know anything about the likelihood of newcomers starting their own businesses?
So I think when comparing immigrants, whether it's new or established, the Canadian-born population, there is more enthusiasm from the immigrant side of it when it comes to starting their own business. If you just want to compare those who are in the working age population, about 3% of immigrants will say that they're entrepreneurs, and that drops to about 2% when you're looking at born in Canada. if you want to compare, and this is from a few years ago, a study where the share of total independent businesses, about 30% of that are set up by immigrants. And it's not just individuals necessarily working for themselves, but these are people who are starting businesses, growing businesses, perhaps hiring additional immigrants to their work, hiring people already born in Canada, Canadian citizens, and they tend to do pretty well. Their longevity is very robust, very comparable to those who are born in Canada, for example. The enthusiasm could be for a number of reasons. So number one, it's just perhaps they were entrepreneurs back in their home country.
Right.
They're coming under specific programs, sometimes PR programs that are aligned for new entrepreneurs, although this number of the total admissions we bring in are quite small, and there are quite a lot of hurdles when it does come to that. So the enthusiasm's there. They do bring in some skills that they brought from their home country, where the barriers, again, could sometimes play a part. How easy is it for them to transfer it over? Access to North American markets, depending on where they're coming from, is a big reason. Now, the fact they're in Canada, they have access to Canadian markets, the American market, Mexican market, or whatnot is a huge deal for them. It's also ease of doing business, transparency of doing business, depending on what country they're coming from. The institutions we have here to set up and sustain a business could be a lot greater and a lot more transparent compared to where they might be coming from before. So just by coming to Canada for a number of new immigrants, there's that incentive for them to start new businesses, to grow new businesses, to sustain them. And while, again, we do have policies in place to help with that, there's definitely more that we could do.
Right. Kingsley, I understand that banking kind of runs in your family. It's kind of the family business. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned earlier that my parents and I immigrated to Canada when I was 14. And my dad's first and only job in Canada was working for Scotiabank. And he started at the contact center, to a little bit what Anthony talked about, right? Like he never worked in a contact center, but sometimes a lot of immigrants coming in need to take a job that get them going. So he worked at the Toronto contact center for Scotiabank for 12 years. And 5 years after he retired, I joined Scotiabank and started at the contact center too. So that's a story there. But at the same time, I think Scotiabank, as many of your listeners would know, we have a big footprint in Latin America. And some of our colleagues have also immigrated from their home countries to Canada too. And we talk about employment a little bit, right? Like the great thing that we can offer our colleagues in Latin America when they want to move to Canada is they have that employment. They are great Scotia bankers and have a lot of skills, and we find them a job in Canada, and they come in knowing that there's employment for them, and that's big coming in being a new Canadian.
All right. Anthony, any final thoughts? What should people take away around what you've told us about the immigration situation?
I'd say at the end of the day, the big thing to take back from all this is that irrespective of where numbers are, immigration is extremely critical to our population growth and our economic growth. We can't do it alone. We're going to need people from all over the world to come to Canada, bring their skills, bring their education, and really help us grow. We haven't done it ourselves in the past. We're not going to do it by ourselves in the future. So it just always comes down to trying to hit that sweet spot, trying to increase numbers efficiently and effectively, and we can really see a lot of positive growth.
Kingsley, how about you? Last words?
Yeah, I think the most important part is making sure new Canadians feel welcome and help them to integrate in the society. And banking is often the first step. So I think me and my colleagues in Scotiabank is figuring out how do we make it easier for our clients. And I think for listeners who are newcomers coming in, if you feel overwhelmed, go and talk to an advisor. We're here to help.
I think we will leave it there. Thank you both for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I've been speaking with Kingsley Chak, the Senior Vice President of Deposits and Investments at Scotiabank, and Anthony Bambokian, Senior Economic Analyst with Scotiabank. The Perspectives podcast is made by me, Stephen Maurice, as well as Armina Lagaya and our producer, Andrew Norton. For a transcript of this episode, as well as other stories, insights, analysis, and thought leadership, visit our website, scotiabank.com/perspectives. We'll see you next time.